Good morning. Today is Thursday, December 26th, 2024. I'm going to start by sharing with you a boring list of historical dates and hopefully draw out an inspiring message that's relevant to every single one of us, every single day, and it is not just limited to Chanukah, but relevant throughout the year. It's incredible the lesson that is available by simply reading a chronology of the events of Chanukah. Now remember, I'm going to share the dates in terms of the year of the Common Era, so that means as the numbers go down, it gets more recent. We're talking about before the Common Era, so as the numbers go down, it comes more recent. 353 BCE, 353 before the Common Era, the second Beit HaMikdash is built. Remember, there was a first temple built by David and Shlomo that was destroyed, 100-year exile about. Then after the story of Esther, they came back, built the second Beit HaMikdash. That's 353. 319 is the beginning of the Greek era. This is the beginning of the time that the Assyrian Greeks started to exercise input and control within the land of Israel. It continues for quite a long time, until 175 BC. That's the beginning of the reign of Antiochus. Antiochus was this evil king who promulgated some of the terrible decrees against the Jewish people. And Antiochus is really the villain of the Chanukah story. And he begins his reign as the head of the Syrian Greeks in Israel in 175 BCE. 168 BCE. So that's just 7 years after his reign, he desecrates the Beit HaMikdash. So that means that the daily offerings in the Beit HaMikdash are halted. Instead of offerings to God, there are statues to pagan idols that are put there. So 168 before the Common Era, the Beit HaMikdash is desecrated. 165, this is the date that we date as Hanukkah. 165 is the beginning of the work of the Maccabees. Yehuda Maccabee and his brothers, they begin a partial conquest of Israel. That is when they are able to clean out the statues from the Beit HaMikdash, and that is when they find this jar of oil. So the miracle of the oil occurs. So 165 BCE, there's a partial conquest by the Maccabees, and the miracle of the oil in the Beit HaMikdash, enough for 1 day, lasts for 8 days. 162, 3 years later, Antiochus besieges Jerusalem. So 3 years later, Jerusalem is in trouble again from the Assyrian Greeks. They are under siege. 161, 1 year later, before the Common Era, the Greeks are in charge of Israel, and they appoint a Kohen Gadol, whose name is Alchemist. I don't ever like to make fun of anybody's names, and I'm not making fun of his name. But the fact that his name is Alchemist should give you an idea that he was not Kohen Gadol material. He was a person supported by the Greeks. And this was a spiritual low point of the Jewish people, to have the Kohen Gadol, the highest spiritual leader of the Jewish people, led by a person who was completely undeserving and appointed by the Greeks. That's 161 before the Common Era. That's 4 years after the miracle of the oil. That's 161. 160, the next year, before the Common Era, Yehuda Maccabee is killed in battle. 142, This is 19 years later. Yonasan Maccabee, Judah's brother, is killed in battle. 140 before the Common Era, so this is now 25 years after the miracle of the oil, is the beginning of the Hashmonaim dynasty. The Hashmonaim, the descendants of the Maccabees, establish a kingdom in Israel 25 years after the miracle of the oil and the rededication of the Beis HaMikdash. 63 before the Common Era, so that's 40 and 75 years later approximately, the Roman consul Pompey conquers Jerusalem. So now the Hashmonaim dynasty lasted about 70 years or so, and then Rome is in control of Israel, and finally, 120 years later, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash by Rome in the year 70, 68 or 70 of the Common Era, depending on how you count. So if you look at this, and I admit that this is very dry and very boring, but if you look at these dates, you see something absolutely incredible, that the miracle of Chanukah, the military triumph of a small band of Maccabees, triumphing over a gigantic army of the Assyrian Greeks, and at the same time the miracle of the oil and rededicating the Beit HaMikdash, did not end the problems facing the Jewish people. It did not usher in an era of global resurgent Jewish life. The military triumphs that we celebrate on Hanukkah were only partially successful, and they were soon reversed. They did not last. National sovereignty was not achieved for 25 years after the establishment of Hanukkah as a Chag. Right? Hanukkah was a holiday for 25 years before there was actually a Jewish monarchy in Israel. And even when the Hashmonaim dynasty finally began, it was very short-lived. Ultimately, Israel was again overtaken by the Greeks, and then it was overtaken by the Romans. The Romans destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. The original menorah remains lost. But nevertheless, we celebrate Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah. Today is the first day of Hanukkah. And this lesson is so important for every single area of life, for every one of us. Because many of us think of life in either or terms. Something or someone is either good or bad. We think of ourselves as either happy or sad. Our observance of Torah is either complete or irrelevant. Hanukkah teaches us that none of that is true. Hanukkah teaches us to appreciate small steps, baby steps. At the time of Hanukkah, the Beis HaMikdash was cleansed and rededicated. Some, though not all Jews, came closer to Hashem. Eventually, there were a number of years of Jewish autonomy to serve as a strengthening preparation for the tragic era which was to come next of the Roman influence. At the miracle of Chanukah, 165 before the Common Era, God showed his favor to our efforts through the miracle of the oil. That showed that God was happy with what we were doing at that moment. It was not a complete victory. It was not a permanent redemption. But that is no reason to overlook Chanukah's significance. Nor should we overlook any positive step in our own lives, Life is complex. Chanukah teaches us to face that complexity without oversimplification. Chanukah teaches us to celebrate small steps. And that is such a valuable lesson, especially today, in a complex world that is chaotically mixed with joy and sadness. It's so important for us. If we look at the dates that I mentioned before without knowing about the holiday of Chanukah, I think most people would be hard-pressed to recognize that date, to recognize which date should Chanukah commemorate. Which date is deserving of, worthy of celebration. And the truth is, certainly, many miracles occurred and occur in our history which are not celebrated by holidays. The miracle of Chanukah is not just about a miraculous cruse of oil, only enough to last one day, but it lasted 8 days. The miracle of Chanukah is that our rabbis recognized this baby step as a miracle worthy of being celebrated, held up and nurtured until the final redemption. Our celebration of Chanukah today and this week should inspire us to be in the habit of searching for reasons, even slight reasons or ephemeral reasons, to celebrate and to be grateful to God and to be grateful for each other. Just because they are ephemeral, just because they are slight, they are no less important. And the genius of our sages is to have us look for what can we find to celebrate. And in a list where it is not at all obvious, our rabbis saw that military battle in 165 before the Common Era, even though it was reversed, and the miracle of the oil in 165 before the Common Era, even though the holiness of the Beit HaMikdash did not last, it's worthy of celebrating, and we celebrate it today. And we remind ourselves to look for steps in our own lives and in the lives of others that we can likewise celebrate. My friends, I wish you a great day and a very happy Chanukah. And I look forward to seeing you soon in person.